Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Cozy Christmas Podcast. I'm your host, Art, and Marley was dead to begin with. Alright, we all know by now that A Christmas Carol is hands down my favorite book of all time. If not favorite, probably it comes in at number 2. Tale of Two Cities might be my number 1 story, but Christmas Carol is up there. The next 2 episodes, we're going to be focused specifically on looking at A Christmas Carol. Today I'll be talking with author Gina Dalfonzo, who has just published a book that she edited called The Gospel in Charles Dickens, and it's a collection of his writings with some annotations by Gina that focus on how the gospel is reflected in the writings of Charles Dickens. If that's a topic of interest to you, it's a excellent book. And so I'm going to have her on the podcast today. We're going to talk about the story of A Christmas Carol and all things Dickens. We're going to look at especially the theme of redemption and how it appears in the story. And then in the following episode, we're going to have a very, very special guest. Who might that be? Well, I'm not going to tell you. Stick around till the end of the episode to find out. And no fair skipping ahead just to find out. You have to wait. And if you skip ahead, you're going to be on Santa's naughty list. Guaranteed. I know Santa. He said no skipping. All right. In all seriousness, I really enjoyed the interview with Gina talking about my favorite book. So if you are a fan of Christmas Carol, like I am, we're going to talk about it and so much more. Let's go and we'll visit with Gina. And so here's the interview. Well, as many of you know, I love Charles Dickens, and I am a huge Christmas Carol fanatic. And I am excited to have with me today Gina Dalfonzo. She's the editor of the Dickens blog and also has just recently written a book called The Gospel in Dickens. And it's a survey of many of the passages in Dickens' writings that have the themes of the gospel and of redemption. And it is a remarkable read, and it's a very good introductory read if you're interested in the topic of Dickens's religious beliefs in his writings. Gina, I welcome you today to the Cozy Christmas Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was really glad to have you on. I came across, I think, your blog, first of all, some years ago, and it's always nice to find a community of people that share your interests.
Yes.
And then from there we connect up on Facebook, and there's a nice community there on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
So Gina, tell us a little bit about who you are or how you became interested in Charles Dickens.
Oh, well, that goes all the way back to 9th grade when I first read Great Expectations. And just fell in love with it and fell in love with Dickens and started to read all of his works that I could find. I mean, obviously it took a number of years because there are a lot of works and some of them are very lengthy, but I've been a big fan ever since. I started Dickens' blog in, I think it was 2009 or thereabouts. Not so much to, sort of come across as an expert on Dickens, but more to learn about him, because there's always more to learn about Dickens. There's just so much there, and so much depth, so much to discover, so much detail. So starting the blog was a way for me to learn more, to meet other people who know and love Dickens and could teach me more about him. And so, and then I started the Facebook group that's associated with the blog. As you know, you've been a wonderfully active participant there. And so it's been a great opportunity for Dickensians to come together and chat and learn stuff. And then, as you said, I released the book in September with Plough Publishing. And that was a chance for me to explore my interest in Dickens and just how he sort of wrestled with religion and what his beliefs were and what he thought, what Christianity meant to him.
It does seem like he's had a kind of complicated relationship with the church at times.
Yes.
Where, remember, I think he had trouble with people saying like children had a sin nature, or that there was going to be that they were, I don't know how to put this, but that I think you'd probably have some issues with original sin in children. But then also, he was such a big, I think we'd probably call it social gospel proponent, where he wants to make sure people are taken care of, and he wants to make sure that they have food and they have a place to live, and that they're not poor or living in poverty and forgotten. And then sometimes churches didn't always put an emphasis on that. I always wondered how he would how he would see things today with the state of sometimes churches get into.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to care about the physical needs of people versus the spiritual needs of people.
Yes, that was always something that bothered him. So much of his thinking and writing on faith came from a place of, distress and anger that the church wasn't practicing what it preached, that it wasn't caring for the poor as Christ had called it to do. And so there are those who think he wasn't religious at all. But when you read his books, when you read his writings, both personal and public, you can't really say that, because clearly scripture meant something very significant to him. His thinking was just the way he wrote, his imagery, his quotations, his language were just saturated with scripture. Clearly the redemption story touched something in him very strongly, because you can find echoes of it throughout his works. It's just that he really had major issues with the church, and his thinking wasn't always entirely orthodox too, as you've pointed out. But that, I think that the issue of the church being commanded to care for the poor and not always doing a good job of it, that was one of the major issues for him.
Yeah. And boy, when he would get passionate about something, look out.
That's right.
I would fear ever being on the end of or be in his sights, if he was coming after you. So
oh yes.
Yeah.
Not a good place to be.
No, not at all. Yeah. So you started your interest off in reading Great Expectations, and that's, that was the first one that really caught my attention too. I can remember I think it was maybe 12 or 13, and I saw a trailer for a Great Expectations. I think it was a PBS miniseries or something. And I didn't end up watching it, but I was so captured by the imagery just in the trailer that I ran out and grabbed the book and started reading it. And
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I didn't at that time make it all the way through, but I sure made a good attempt at it. But then I kept coming back to it, and then of course Christmas Carol, I connect the dots, and hey, he wrote one of my favorite movies. This is okay.
That's very similar to how it was for me, because when I was a kid, I loved Mickey's Christmas Carol. The animated Disney version. Yeah. With Goofy as the ghost of Jacob Marley and all that. I was so into that. I watched it so many times. So yeah, as you say, when I got older, and then I loved Great Expectations, and then I sort of put two and two together. Oh, same author. So yeah, I imagine it works that way for a lot of people.
Boy, that was one I loved watching, and I get excited still when I hear the music, because I always seem to remember watching it on Christmas Eve or really close to Christmas. And I was like, all right, Christmas is almost here now. Now, this might be a hard question, but do you have a favorite movie version of Christmas Carol?
Well, I'm very fond of the Alastair Sim version. Mm-hmm. I think that one is just special. It has a lot of great actors. It has all kinds of imaginative and interesting little touches. You may recall also that on my blog several years ago, I had an interview with Teresa Darrington, who played Fred's maid in that version. And I mean, it was just, it was so interesting and fun how the whole thing came about. I had posted something on the blog about how this actress who just has this very small part, but she plays it so well. Mm-hmm. And she's so admired, but her name didn't make it into the credits and people didn't know who she was. And then one of her relatives posted to tell me, this is who she is. And that she and a couple of family members got together and put her in touch with me, and I got to interview her over the phone. And that was just such a highlight for me in my whole history of blogging, of writing. To get the chance to do that was wonderful. So all that to say, I sort of feel like I have a little personal connection with that version of that film adaptation. But I will say a close second is The Muppet Christmas Carol. I love that version so much, just as I think nearly everybody does. It's so sweet and funny. And, it's really it really follows Dickens very closely, and it incorporates a lot of his language into it. More than a lot of other versions do, I think, just through the device of having Gonzo narrate, portraying Mr. Dickens. So, I mean, you gotta love that. It's really funny. It's really cute. It's really, appealing to the kids, but it's at the same time, it's a way to bring Dickens language into it. So, I mean, how can you not love that?
Right. Well, okay. Those are acceptable answers. Good job. No,
I'm glad to hear that.
No, yeah, those are two of my favorites. I mean, in the Mickey's Christmas Carol it's amazing what that can do with just how little bit of time screen it has. So, or screen time it has. I guess let's kind of, switch gears here a little bit and talk about your book and as it relates to even A Christmas Carol. You again have written a book called The Gospel in Dickens. What I like about it is how it just collects in one place all the passages that really pertain, or you'll see his religious beliefs come out in his writing. And then you have some annotations on those that are helpful to kind of explain a few things. And so if this is a topic people are interested in, I think this is a great place to start, is just to read what he wrote himself and take it from there. So as we look at A Christmas Carol, I mean, this is such a well-known story. It's been adapted and readapted. It's been put into different TV shows and all these things. Everybody knows this story. And so as we look at that story today, and I want to consider the things like redemption in the story, all that to say, how would you define what is the gospel? Somebody might not know that, be familiar with that term. So when we say the gospel in Dickens, what are you referring to there?
At the most basic level, as you know, I think the word gospel just means good news. Mm-hmm. And it's the word we use to describe the good news of Christ, his life, death, resurrection, and his teachings. So the title here, The Gospel in Dickens, it actually comes from my publisher, Plough, has a whole series of the Gospel in Great Writers books, which I recommend. They have the Gospel in Tolstoy, the Gospel in Dostoevsky, the Gospel in Dorothy L. Sayers, several entries, and so that's why this is called The Gospel in Dickens. And the idea of each book in this series, and so the idea of my book, is to just say, okay, what did this writer think of the gospel? How did this writer engage with the gospel? What did it mean to this person? How did he write about it? All these things. So what I did was I chose passages from Dickens, and several of those are from A Christmas Carol, but also many from the other books as well. And I just arranged them in a way that you can sort of see Dickens' thoughts on the gospel coming out in them. You can see themes of sin and redemption and restoration and what it looks like to live a good life. All these things, how they play out in the thinking and writing of Charles Dickens.
So the gospel is, for many churches, that's the foundation of, I think what our message should be, that good news that we can have redemption, that we can have forgiveness, restoration with God, however people want to put that. I got interested in this subject. And I can't think of the guy's name now. It was the book God and Charles Dickens.
Mm-hmm. By Gary College, yes.
I had gotten that book for Christmas a couple years ago because, my family knows what I like.
That's great.
It was kind of my introduction into that because I hadn't really thought about it, and then I realized that, there is really a deep religious aspect to a lot of what Dickens wrote, especially in my mind in A Christmas Carol. Just the whole journey Scrooge takes from being that, as I got the passage here, he's referred to as a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, which is just a wonderful description. Well, terrible description of someone, but maybe you had pointed that out. Somebody had pointed that out, that it's beautifully written, and yet it's accurate, but also, what a terrible state to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So we find Scrooge, I guess for lack of a better term, we find Scrooge as an old sinner who has turned away from the world. He has followed his idol, his god of money. And we see that it hasn't really brought him to a happy place in his life. So when we talk about the gospel here, is it important to see Scrooge as someone who needs to be redeemed?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's exactly what Dickens, I think, is trying to help us see. His use of language, as you say, he's described as a sinner. The ghosts come and tell him that they're there for his welfare, his what's the word, reclamation, I think. Mm-hmm. I should know that, but I think that's the word they use. Yeah. There are very spiritual terms here and a spiritual principle at work. Although A Christmas Carol is sometimes called a secular Christmas story, even sometimes like the grandfather of all Christmas or secular Christmas stories. The truth is that religious language and imagery is very present, not in a way to sort of hit you over the head. Talk of going to church, talk of the child who was born on Christmas Day. It's all there, and it's not just there by accident. When you read carefully, you see it's really integral to the narrative. And of course, the whole point of the story is this man who needs forgiveness and redemption, who needs to repent. It doesn't. It really doesn't get much more Christian than that.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting the people that Scrooge is presented alongside of. We've got even his clerk Bob Cratchit and his family, that are just really good people. That it's almost like the Cratchits are the ideal that Scrooge should strive for, but maybe he doesn't see it. I don't know. Scrooge treats him so poorly, and yet Bob continues to be kind, and he continues to be loving towards his family, and cares about other people. But then you contrast that with Jacob Marley, who sounds like he was just a terrible person. we don't really get a whole lot of details about Jacob Marley in the story itself. And I know some stories have been written recently trying to maybe flesh out Jacob Marley's story more. That there's an interesting character. And I think he was the one who, when he confronted Scrooge, doesn't he say something like, why didn't I lift my eyes to the star that guided the wise men to the manger, or something like that?
Exactly. He's
realizing in his death that he should have repented, or he should have pursued that redemption, and he just did it.
Yes, and you see how Marley ties Christian faith explicitly to helping others through his whole speech that he gives, and this that amazing and creepy scene where you see all the ghosts wandering about and wanting to help people, and now they can't, which is, I mean, so striking and stays in your memory. In all of that, Dickens ties, seeking the Christ child and seeking redemption and seeking faith to helping those around you, to looking around at your community and seeing how you can help. I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but something about how his business was mankind, but he couldn't see it at the time. His business was not just, his little counting house business. His business was everybody around him, and he failed to see that.
Right. I mean, that's a theme that I think we all could pick up on, whether people have a faith in God or not, but that idea that mankind is our business, that we need to be looking out for each other and helping each other out. I mean, I think that's a teaching that we can all at least agree on, that should be what we should be doing.
Yes.
There at the beginning, Scrooge is in his counting office or counting house, and those two people come in who are collecting money for the poor and all those things. Mm-hmm. He has those words that literally come back to haunt him, when he says, "Are there no workhouses?" Again, I see a lot of times those two characters are kind of set up as almost comic relief kind of thing, and you wonder what their purpose is. But when you really understand, for Dickens, this is what we should be doing, right, is to give to those people. If you have, if you have the resources to help someone in need, then you should maybe make that effort to do that and not just hoard it all to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love Dickens' wording there when he has the two gentlemen talk about how this is the time of year when they want to help the poor, because it's the time when abundance rejoices and want is most keenly felt. And he just puts those two there side by side. And it's so typical of him to just embrace both of those concepts at the same time. Yes, it's Christmas time. Yes, we should rejoice. Yes, people should be celebrating and making merry. And at the same time, people are suffering terribly, and we should be helping them. I love that about him, because he's like a big picture thinker. He's not saying, shame on you for making merry and forgetting about the poor. He's saying these two things should go together. They're tied together, and we should never forget that those who are joyful, it should remind them to turn around and help others to be joyful.
I think there's some truth in that too, of, it's that time of year where maybe poverty is more keenly felt, because you see everyone having a great time, and you see, these families that are celebrating, and, maybe there's a lot of presents or whatever, and you aren't able to do that. It can hurt, especially, as a child, maybe. Especially children are more sensitive to that. I like what you said there, that Dickens, wants you to celebrate big, but don't forget those, your fellow man in that process.
Right.
And I think, maybe this year with, as many are calling it, a COVID Christmas, we're maybe going to have some more opportunities to practice this, to reach out to those people who are suffering and help them out, remembering that we're fellow creatures walking together through this.
Yes.
And so Scrooge has this interesting journey through the story. He's confronted with his past, and we find that there are some maybe valid reasons he is the way he is. He's had some heartache. He's had some tragedy. He also let in an idol in his life, as I think his fiance put it, that a golden idol has replaced her. He loves money more than anything else. And, if we want to carry on a religious themes there, scripture has a lot to say about the love of money and its evil.
Right.
Having these illustrations like this, or having a story like this, we see this is what happens when you love money above all else. You become a bitter, angry, lonely man.
Right.
Yeah. He's just alone through this, what should be the most joyous time of year for him. Where do you think in the story, where does Scrooge really begin to start a change in his, I guess, in his journey of redemption?
Well, I think it's fairly early on. The change sort of, it happens gradually, and yet I think it starts pretty early. Those scenes of his past just really start to work on him pretty quickly, which makes you think, well, it must be a long time that he's completely buried these thoughts and not gone back to them at all, his history, because for them to move him so much, it's like, well, this must be something he hasn't thought of in a long time, because he's so hardened and withered inside. But things like when he sees Fezziwig giving the party, and he says, it wasn't just that he spent a little money on a Christmas party. It was the spirit in which he did it. It was his kindness. It was his generosity, and all these things. And then he says something like, "Oh, I wish I could say a word to Bob Cratchit that right now. That's all." So it doesn't. When you get right down to it, it doesn't take much to move him. It's just that for all these years, he refused to face up to these things that would move him. And then, of course, when he gets into the present and he sees the Cratchit family and Fred and his party and all these things, they do their own work towards changing him. But it's really happening all through the night, almost from the very beginning.
I mean, I read this story every year. Just about, I think I've read it about 20 times, maybe more. And every time I always seem to catch something. But I remember reading that when he's there and in Christmas past, and he sees himself and in the corner of the schoolhouse, and it says, and he wept. And I was just really struck by that, the past has had a profound impact on him. When he's faced with it moves him. It's almost a traumatic experience for him.
Yes, that's well said.
But then bring it to the present. It's one of my favorite passages, where it's at near the end of when the Bob Cratchit family scene, and it talks about how they weren't a handsome family, but Peter knew the inside of a pawn shop, but they were happy with each other and contented with the time. And I love that passage. It's probably it's hard to pick a favorite one, but that's the one I really sticks out. But then it says, like, he is watching Tiny Tim until the last. And it's like, boy, something about that. He just is to the point of being broken. And then you jump to the future, and he sees, like, the end results of his behavior. He dies alone, and Tiny Tim dies very young. It brings heartache to the family. And it's like, if this is the path you're going to choose to live, here's just a couple of results that will come from it. And I mean, and that's generally what you find a lot of in Dickens's writings, if I'm not mistaken, is that he's trying to get his readers to see, here's the way people are living, and this is why it's wrong, or this is what it will result in. I'm trying to think of some of his other novels. Like, I know, what is it? Is it Nicholas Nickleby that talks about the schools that are poorly run and all that? And Oliver Twist, he's trying to get you to see the plight of the orphans on the street, and other stories like that. It's he wants his readers to see that there are people who are hurting and things that need to change. And I love that he ties it all up in just a well-written story too.
Yes, he was the master of that.
And that's what a thing, I guess, just as a side note, that I love about his writing, is that like Christmas Carol, it's a great story if you just wanted to read it for the story's sake. But if you really dig down into it, you can find a profound amount of, religious themes, social themes. I mean, I was going to ask you, do you think A Christmas Carol is just as relevant for our world today as it was when he first wrote it?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's timeless, so I think it will always be relevant. I think that it just calls us to look beyond ourselves. It calls us out of our natural selfishness, which I think everyone has some of. I know I do. And it just asks us to look around, to see the people who are in want, the people we can help, the people who are, practically at our doorstep, but that we maybe haven't thought about. And it tells us, this is Christmas. This is when we celebrate. This is when abundance rejoices. Again, we celebrate a gift that was given to us by God, and in His name, in remembrance of Him, we need to get out beyond ourselves and to reach out to those who need help, who are in want. And that message will always be relevant. As you said, this is going to be a particularly tough Christmas for many. And these are the people that, these always were the people that Dickens was most concerned about, the sick, the isolated, the poor, the lonely. He wanted us to do what we could for them. So yes, it's absolutely relevant.
Yeah. When we look at the gift we've been given in the gospel, that gift of Jesus Christ, and then to hold that, as if it were only ours, or to not then let it change us so that we want to help to reach out and help others, or, at the very least be kind to others, or show that love that we've been shown towards others. I think it's incredibly selfish of us to just hold on and not show that same love and compassion that has been shown towards us. So then in the story, we get, of course, Scrooge's redemption at the end, which is always a joy to read.
Yes.
He is excited. He's happy. He's as giddy as a schoolboy, And I love the little parts that Dickens puts in it. Like, how does he say that shaving is complicated, even if you're not trying to dance while you're doing it,
Yes, that's a wonderful line.
Oh, and I sometimes think about that when I'm shaving, trying to shave and dance around.
Careful.
Yeah. Especially on the neck,
Yeah.
I love the change that comes over him, because, that's the change that the gospel can have in a person's life, that it gives you hope. It gives you, joy. And I think Scrooge experiences that now, to know that he has a chance for redemption, and he has a chance to do good in the time that he has left.
Yes. Yes. And he, in the language of the Bible, he really becomes like a little child. and
Yeah.
I mean, that's explicitly scriptural, that attitude. But I mean, he had to hit rock bottom. He had to see, the depth of his own sin. He had to be humbled. But I think Dickens is making a point here that it's only when you've been humbled that you can know that kind of joy. Scrooge at the end, just completely unself-conscious, no longer self-absorbed, no longer, his own self is now at the bottom of his concerns. He just wants to enjoy this happiness and to spread it as far and wide as he can. And so, yeah, it's just a glorious picture of redemption.
I love that he's changed. And I know there's a boy, there's maybe a play or a couple of or another story or something I had come across recently that showed Scrooge like after this all happened, and he was back to being a kind of a Grinch again or something. I don't even remember where I came across this, but I'm like, no, didn't you read didn't you read the story? It said he
Yeah.
changed. He made it an authentic change.
Yeah.
I think it was a play that Scrooge tries to sue the ghosts of Christmas for interfering in his life. Something like that.
Oh, that's fascinating. I haven't heard about this.
Yeah, I wish I could remember what it was called now, but yeah, I'm like, I don't want that one. That's somebody didn't read the story.
Yeah, I mean, you can have fun with fanfic. Lots of people have, unpublished and published. Lots of people have done all kinds of fun things with like sequel ideas and whatnot. But if you don't get that change in there, you're not being authentic. You're not being
Right.
true to the spirit of the story. You've missed a very, very fundamental truth. So
Yeah.
don't want to go that way.
Oh, well, that's just me though. But yeah, I know many people out there love to read the Christmas Carol every year. And they like to watch the different movie versions of it. And I mean, I think it's such an important part of many people's Christmas traditions. And I'm grateful to have the story. It really helps us to wrap our brains around maybe some of the deeper theological things when we can put a story to it. I mean, that's how Jesus taught,
Yes.
right? He used
Yes.
parables, and I think really we could call this story a parable.
Mm-hmm.
Some maybe will disagree, but I think it's a great parable. It's a great story of a lot of things. I try to sum it up in one word. I don't know if you can.
It's difficult too.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts you want to bring up here about the book, about Christmas Carol?
Just that, as you say, it sort of works like a parable. It works on so many levels, really. It works as a parable. It works as just a great story. There is so much truth in it, and it resonates with us. And I think that's why we keep coming back to it all the time, every year. I mean, and of course, it doesn't hurt that it's truth that's wrapped in this just wonderful, delightful story with these absolutely unforgettable characters. But it's just that the kinds of stories that stay with you are the ones that hit on these deep, fundamental truths that we all deep down recognize. And so this is one of them. And so, as I was saying earlier, it will always be relevant and people will always be reading it. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
No, do you have a favorite part in Christmas Carol, or is that an impossible question?
Oh gosh. Oh, how to pick a favorite part. Oh, I don't know. There's so much good stuff. I mean, the ending is great. I have a soft spot for the ending. I don't know if I would say I would probably change my favorite part like many times, but like I might have a different favorite every time you ask me. But I'm a little bit partial to the descriptions of Christmas morning when Scrooge is with the ghost of Christmas present, and the grocers nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through those gaps, such glimpses. And then you get all the wonderful descriptions of the food, of the people running around and greeting each other and running into each other. And just so much, Dickens, when he just like overflows into these enthusiastic and excited descriptions, I mean, there's no writer who can touch him. he's just inspired. He just brings so much joy and giddiness and excitement to it. And I mean, I could just read that over and over.
And I'll read my favorite part that I had mentioned, but at the Cratchit's house, so again, you're talking about just the humbleness of the family, but it says about them, it says they were not a handsome family, They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. And I just think that's so beautiful that,
that's a good choice. That's so lovely.
They didn't need all the riches of the world. They didn't need all the fancy whatever. They had each other, and they were happy and content. And, I think that's maybe a lesson we're all being reminded of this year, with having to kind of stay home for longer than we want. Our governor just passed some restrictions now because of COVID. Numbers are going up in Iowa. And she said, that she's going to have to cancel her Thanksgiving plans with her family. And that's hard, but kind of we're in a spot that maybe that's necessary right now. But, I think it's going to be a good reminder to us of what really matters, and how much this time is precious for us to not get caught up in all the, commercialism, or caught up in all the sparkle and the shine of the season, but to actually remember what really matters. And like you said, not that we shouldn't celebrate and shouldn't, have those lights and things, but to remember what's really important in our celebrations.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, I have often in the past railed against all those TV specials and commercials that have been that say, well, the true meaning of Christmas is this, or the true meaning of Christmas is that, and come up with a dozen different true meanings of Christmas without ever hitting on the right one. But I think maybe this Christmas is going to make us all have to rethink a few things. And the circumstances are horrible, and my heart goes out to everybody who's dealing with them. But times like this, times of trouble, they do sort of focus you on what matters, as you say.
Yeah, we can turn some good out of this, I think.
I hope so.
Before we go, do you have any a favorite Christmas memory or tradition your family does that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, sure. Well, my family is largely Italian American, and so there are a couple of Italian cookies that we like to make every year at Christmas. Pizzelles, which are, for those who don't know, are sort of like a waffle cookie. You make them in something that looks like a waffle iron, and they're like a flat cookie, usually with anise flavoring, although you can use different flavorings. And then biscotti, like a loaf cookie. We make those too. So those are one of our the most cherished Christmas traditions in my family.
Good. Those sound good.
Yes.
My stepmom was Italian, and she passed away 5 years ago or so, I think, or maybe even longer ago now. But she was a feisty little Italian. She stood 5 foot tall if she was an inch, and but she would. We got to visit her a couple times over Christmas, and man, she made goodies and cookies and food, and it was so good. It was always so good. Pack in my 15 pounds of Christmas weight.
Good for you.
If you ever went hungry at her house, you were not trying or something. I don't know.
I believe it.
Yep. Well, Gina, I appreciate you giving up an hour tonight to talk about one of my favorite books.
Oh, it's been great.
Yeah. If only we could have another 3 or 4 hours. But if folks want to find you online, where would they do that?
Well, you can find me at dickensblog.typepad.com. That's where Dickens blog lives. And I have an author page on Facebook. Just look for Gina Dalfonzo, author. It's the best way to search there. You can also search for Dickens blog on Facebook, and find the group that goes with the blog. If you just want to get in there and talk Dickens with fellow fans. And then I'm on Twitter, and my handle is just at Gina Dalfonzo, GinaDalfonzo.
All right. Yeah, and I, of course, heartily recommend the blog and the Facebook group. I always, if I find something I'm excited about, but nobody in my family's excited about, I know where to post. I know where to post that.
We are here for you.
That's right. Absolutely. So, anyway, Gina, you have a Merry Christmas, and thanks for stopping by the podcast.
Thanks. Same to you.
Okay, I want to again thank Gina for giving up some time to talk to me about Christmas Carol. If you enjoy Dickens like I do, come on over to the Dickens blog on Facebook. You can check her website out as well. All right, so speaking of Christmas Carol, drum roll please, for our second part of our Christmas Carol mini-series, I had the chance to interview Charles Dickens, who is the great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens. He performs one-man theater shows around the United States at Christmas time, and he is the one that I have seen him perform several times. I didn't tell him this during the interview, but he's my Scrooge. Hashtag my Scrooge. I'm going to get a chance to talk with him some more about A Christmas Carol. We're going to talk about him performing the play and a new film version that he is working on putting together. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that interview with you all. So stay tuned. In a couple days, that interview will drop. I am so grateful for that opportunity. All right. So in the meantime, if you like the show and want to support us, you can go to ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com. For the price of a cup of coffee, you can help support the show. If you would be so kind as to give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you can rate podcasts, and share us among your friends. Word of mouth is the best way to let others know about the podcast, and I appreciate those who are doing that. And we're going to hear from some more of your stories in upcoming episodes. Send me in a Christmas memory. It doesn't have to be long. You can record it on your phone or type it up in an email. Get it to me at cozychristmaspodcast@gmail.com, and I'll send you a Christmas card and a podcast sticker. So in the meantime, be kind to each other and share your stories. And remember that there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. Have a very Merry Christmas.